What's up, guys? So I just finished this 74 Ironhead up for the second time, third time building it out. But I know you want to see the bike right away, so I'll get to that right now, and then I'll explain a little bit to you more about this crazy story that happened building this bike. All right. And here we are out in the sun. Get a better look at this paint. Just finished up this brass knuckle holder yesterday. It's a steel and leather hand fabricated piece. Alright, guys, so this can be a long story, and I'm going to try to cut it down because I know how things get on YouTube and people's attention spans nowadays. Um, there's an original video of last year that I did of this bike, this customer bike, and at that time, I didn't know what was going to happen with this build when I did that video. I had just got it together for the first final assembly. So I'm gonna cut out all the part about the history of this, other than this belonged to a buddy of mine across town, and he approached me at the end of 2021 about wanting a vintage chopper. He did a lot of looking, couldn't find one, and he had given me a call one day out of the blue, knowing what I do, and said, okay, so if I get a stock old bike, could you just do it for me? Sure, no problem. So he wound up getting this 1974 Harley Ironhead right side shift, and completely stock, in okay condition, but it's a 50-year-old bike. So I did the hardtail, all the fab on it, and what had happened was I finished fab, and whenever I finish fab, I like to put the bike all back together in the raw. Get it running, get it driving. I want to ride it. I want the owner to ride it. Number one, to make sure everything's working okay and safe. And then also, if there's any changes we need to make, that's the time to do it with no paint. And that was all, that's exactly what happened. In fact, in the now going on 11 years, I've been building all the things that I built here at this place. This is the only build I've had with this amount of significant, insane problems. So, Fab's done. Everything was fine. Everything was rocking along fine. And it was time. He's like, well, I got this painter lined up already, and I am going to have him do it. Okay. So my normal assumption would be, as the builder and welder fabricator, I'm going to tear this bike down to the bare bones. Anything that needs to be painted, i.e. the frame, the tins, and that's it really, is going out. Everything else is staying here. I was going to go ahead and detail the engine myself because it needed aluminum polishing and some painting and cleaning up. But then I heard, well, the painter's going to do the engine also. And I was like, okay, I really don't like the engine leaving my site because I don't know what could happen to it if that is going to be the case. But I agreed with it because it's what he wanted to do. So I made a stand for the engine as well, and everything went out. The frame, the tins, I even set the bike up as a roller, and the engine went to the painter as well on the stand. So all that's gone for about, I think, 4 or 5 months, which was also quite a bit beyond what we were expecting. And I got the bike back painted in July of 2022. And I know because it was on my birthday, and I was already working 50, 60-hour weeks at that time. The summer is the peak of my regular work schedule as well. But anyhow, now I had a bike to put back together, and it probably took me, I want to say, about a month to get to where that I was ready to fire the bike again for the first time after final assembly. I mean, think about this. I'm working 10, 12-hour days, regular stuff. Then I come home and work on this thing 3-4 hours in the 100-degree Texas heat, although my shop space is air conditioned now. And then I get final assembly done, and this pig won't start. And I chased all the demons of why an engine won't start. Even though my primary focus these days is on welding and fab, I actually was an engine builder years and years before I became a hardcore fabricator / welder. So I know engines inside and out. And this was a perfectly good running engine before it left. and then it came back. Now it won't start no matter what I do. And on a notion of getting a cough out of the carburetor, I was like, you know what? Let me just pull the plugs and run a compression test. I did a compression test and I had 0 pounds of pressure on the rear cylinder and only 20 to 30 pounds max on the front cylinder, which obviously I'm like, well, there's your problem right there, folks. It doesn't matter how much spark, air, fuel you're getting. With no compression, you're not going anywhere. Which is in any case going to be a major internal problem. My first guess was, well, either since these are solid lifter cams, either there's a tight valve and the valves need to be adjusted, so I'm going to check that first, or the cam timing got thrown way out, which on a Sportster engine or any of the Evo engines, there's hardly no way that a cam timing can get thrown out without the engine being disassembled to some degree. It's impossible because it's all gear driven. So no tight valves when I checked it. I had gotten the rear wheel off the ground and put it in 5th gear and had turned the engine over with the rear wheel and checked the valves first. But then upon inspection of this, I'm watching the push rods go up and down as I'm turning the rear wheel. And on one of the cylinders, it was probably the rear, which would make sense because that was the cylinder with 0 compression. Instead of your intake going up and coming down, exhaust going up, coming down, and both being seated on compression, when I would turn the engine over, I would notice both push rods coming up at the same time and one coming down slightly before the other, but both settling at the same time. I'm like, there it is right there. The cam timing's way out. And something went along with this whole thing for me, which was when I initially tried to fire the bike, I always pre-lube these engines with the plugs out, and I spin the engine over on the starter to get full oil circulation before I even try to fire a V-twin dry sump engine. And whenever I first started doing this, where the cam cover mates to the case on the right side of the bike, there was oil just pouring out over where your points/ignition cover would be, right above that. And that wasn't there before it went to paint. And I had videoed this for the owner and sent it to him. And that's a gasket mating surface. The only way in my mind that it went away with no leak and came back with a huge leak was somebody took the cam cover off and put it back on and either didn't use a new gasket or left a chunk of old gasket in it, something that caused a big gap in there. But this right away, this threw up the red flags to me. I'm like, you know what? Somebody took that cover off. A cam probably fell out, or 2 of them, who knows. They slapped them back in any old way, and then there went the cam timing. The owner calls the paint shop. Nobody knows anything at the paint shop, and apparently, according to them, the cover wasn't even removed. Okay. So I tell the owner, I'm like, look, at this point, the engine left my care perfectly fine and running. It came back like this. Nobody knows anything. But that being said, another independent shop now needs to look at this engine or go in this engine and find out what happened. Because if somebody did something in there, which obviously something happened, I don't need your paint guy coming back and saying, well, how do you know it wasn't your guy? Because he went in there. So I didn't touch it. I'm not touching it. We took it to an independent Dallas area cycle shop, which I'm not going to mention any shop names in this. But anyhow, the bike was there for about 3 weeks. Their mechanic calls him, the owner, back with this story that the exhaust valves are burnt, and that's why it has no compression, which I called bullshit right away. How did a perfectly fine running engine with compression come out of the bike here, go to a shop out of the bike, and come back with burnt valves and no compression. So he says, wait a minute, let me call you back. So the mechanic calls the owner back a second time, which to me, I'm like, oh, so you needed a minute to cook up a story. So now they tell the owner, well, the pinion key on the crankshaft, which essentially holds your flywheel, your pinion on your crank here, your flywheel, there's a keyway in there that holds the flywheel from rotating on the pinion shaft, that key had sheared and caused the cam timing to be out. Now, you got to remember the engine's still in the bike. You can't see those pinion keys until you pull the whole engine and split the cases. So I'm like, okay, I went with the owner to this shop. It was on the lift. The whole top end was tore apart, not the bottom end. The cases and transmission are still in the bike. He's saying, well, the key sheared, that's why the cam timing's off, and that you can't see that key with the cases together. So we're only going on the assumption that the key is sheared. We're only going on this off of your word. He wanted $2,500 cash to even start the repair. The repair could go on a couple of months, with the bill being somewhere in the neighborhood of $7,000 to $7,500. But it could potentially even go higher than that. So essentially you're saying you want the owner to write an open check for you. And we're also now at a repair that's approaching the final value of this bike. And with that being said, the owner of the bike asked the owner of the shop, what would you do if it was your bike? Which the owner told him, I would just sell it as is, as a project, take the loss. And I think he already had in the neighborhood of $2,500 to $3,000 in the paint job. He already had probably $2,000 something to me in fab work. This was a stock bike that I had already cut in half and hardtailed and did all this custom work to just sell it. So you can imagine this is a pretty devastating answer, which would also be a pretty devastating waste of a bike. And I had even suggested, if it were mine, I would just put a late model Sportster engine in there and get rid of the Ironhead altogether, as they're fairly readily available for cheap. But my cost as a fabricator to you, it's still going to end up being cost prohibitive. So we pulled the bike from that shop, brought it back to my place, and the owner and his brother just started doing a search and found a builder in Denton, Texas by the name of Ironhead Cycle LLC, who specializes obviously only in Ironhead engines. And he said, well, this guy can do the whole engine for, I think it was $1,800. It might have even been $1,700, but let's just say $1,800. And I'm like, well, that's a no-brainer to me. And so I went ahead and pulled the cases and the rest of it from the bike, prepped the entire engine, and we crated it and took it out to this guy's place. He's had it since October of last year, 2022. And when we brought it out there and I had run down this story to him, he said the same thing. I'm calling bullshit on the key being sheared. That rarely happens, and even when it happens, it's typically on the clutch basket side, not the cam side, which would give you no clutch, but not throw the cam timing out. So we're back to the only way the cam timing can be thrown out is if someone pulled the cam cover and put a cam or two cams in wrong, whatever was the case, and just didn't give a shit, thinking, oh, pass the buck to the builder, because that's essentially what whoever it was did. So he had it at his place, Ironhead Cycle LLC, since October for about 4 months. And I got the engine back now, I want to say late February. This is March 18th today. The bike just left yesterday, by the way, the finished running bike. So I got the engine back late in February, and it was good that we went through it anyhow, because he found some cracks in the cases in the lower end that he welded and repaired. There was one drain plug hole strip that he welded and drilled and tapped, and the transmission countershaft was also damaged at the lock ring groove, which he also repaired. He probably welded it and turned it down, and the cylinders were cleaned out, so we got new pistons, rings. He redid the upper end, which the valve guides were bad anyway. Not that they would cause no compression, but they were causing it to burn oil. So new valves, new guides. There was one rocker shaft that he had replaced. So there was a lot of stuff in there that needed to be gone through anyhow. And we got an all brand new engine. With the extra added repairs, the owner still came out less than $3,000 for an all brand new engine. Well, here we are, brand new engine back from Ironhead Cycle LLC in Denton, Texas. Did a wonderful, wonderful job. I'm super happy with it. And I got to have a really good chat with the fellow Gary, the engine builder out there, about everything. And basically have a brand new engine back. And now I've got to dig that fellow out over there. Been up in there for 4 months and change now. Get ready to drop her in again. So anyhow, I got the bike all together here in the last couple of weeks. As you can see in the clips that I'm going to put on here, it runs great, and it's back to better than what it was after fab. It fires on the first piston up, doesn't burn oil now, everything's fresh, all new gaskets, which is great because somebody originally put the engine together with silicone, which I'm not going to go into all that. But I'm so glad that, for the owner's sake and for my own, that the project was saved. I mean, this is a guy that just wanted a nice bike. I'm just a builder who wanted to build the best bike that I could build for this guy the way he wanted it. And all these people in the middle, people who just don't care, don't give a shit, have no integrity in what they do, caused all of this. I always like to believe that everything happens for a better reason, and I try to stay on the positive about things. But this was a situation that definitely tested that in me. I don't like to get mad over my work because I do consider it work, a separate thing from who I am. So I don't like to let it get me mad, especially if I didn't even do it. But this wound up costing the owner extra thousands of dollars. Part of it to me as well, for having to build a bike out 2 times and run all over the Dallas area with them. But anyhow, there it is, guys. That's what happened with this thing. It's a great bike though. Thanks for tuning in.